Welcome back to the fifth episode of Between the Lines podcast. Today we're joined by a special guest, Akhilesh, also known as Ocky. He's been wanting to join, and it's a good day to join. We're going to be talking about the NBA playoffs today. I know last week we said we talk about the draft in this episode, but we'll do that next week when we're closer to the actual draft day, and we're going to preview the entire play-in and playoffs. Okay, so now we're going to overview the play-in games, and they're going to be starting whenever this video comes out, April 14th. So let's start with the first game being played, Charlotte Hornets hosting the Miami Heat. And I think this is like it's gonna be a fun game because the Hornets obviously really high-powered offense, like came out of nowhere, got a play-in spot, and they had the two leading three-point shooters in the league in terms of quantity. It was kind of funny seeing like Khan and LaMelo battling for that, but I'm just gonna take the Hornets. I'm gonna take the hotter team here. They've been on its hair since like the All-Star break. Like the Heat, like they were just trying to like it's like they were like it was harder for them to win than lose. Like they're just losing so many games. I mean, Bam dropped 83, but besides that, they haven't had anything notable in like the last couple of months. So I'm just gonna pick the hotter team here and pick the Hornets. But what about you guys?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with
but
the
you go
same
ahead.
thing. I'm gonna take the Hornets on this one too. Like you said, like they did have that Bam 83-point game, but literally since that game, they've been an under 500 team. They've 7-10 since that day. That was March 10th. And the Hornets from that day onwards are 12-5. So a team that's above 500, playing really well. Like you said, two really good three-point sharpshooters, a third strong player in Brandon Miller, a strong center, Musa Diabate. Just a team overall that's playing with a lot of physicality and a lot of strength. So I'm going to take the Hornets. And what about you, Aki?
Yeah, I agree with all your points from both of you. I'm gonna go with the Hornets as well. I think since the All-Star break, the Hornets as a team has been playing very well. They've been winning a lot more games than losing. And just to reiterate what you said, with LaMelo and Khan being the two best three-point shooters in the league, and I think the Miami Heat, they faced some injuries this year with Tyler Hero not playing as well, and so I don't think that, they can go on the road and win against a very good Hornets team that has really been on a hot streak recently. So yeah.
All right, so looks like all of us have the Hornets winning this one.
All right, so next we're going to talk about the 7A playing game in the West. So we got the Portland Trail Blazers, and they're traveling to take on the Phoenix Suns in Phoenix. So this game, I'm take the Suns. Obviously, the Blazers a little bit of an up and coming team this year with a lot of good young players and players stepping up to their roles. Denny Avdia obviously taking a role as a potential like NBA All Star this year. And then you have like players like Drew Holiday, Jeremy Grant that are players that are a little bit older but starting to take their roles. Jeremy Grant questionable for this game, and then even younger players like Donovan Clingan, Scoot Henderson, a guy they took with a really high draft pick back in 23, starting to make some of those roles as a bench point guard. So they do have some young players, but I'm just going to go with the Suns, who have a little bit more experience overall, just as a team. Really strong, like number one player in Devin Booker, who's obviously had a finals run in the past, a lot of different deep playoff runs. Strong performances this season from a guy like Dylan Brooks, who's put in a lot of like time and like just made sure that he's playing like almost above his contract value, above what we thought of him in the past. Is kind of just like an enforcer player. He's really taken on a strong offensive role. Both these guys like tend to be a lot of those like ISO, just like mid-range buckets, which might not work for them in the playoffs in the long term. But I could see them taking down a young like upstart team in the Blazers. So I'm going to take the Suns in this game. So what about you guys?
I guess I'll agree with you. I'll take the Suns here. I feel like they just have a lot more experience overall. Devin Booker obviously went to the finals before. I think he's now like Phoenix's all-time leading scorer. So he's been around the block. He knows about going in the playoffs. Even though he hasn't really won much, he still knows about the pressure. And then Dylan Brooks, borderline all-star. They got other good role players like Colin Gillespie, Mark Williams. I feel like they have a pretty honestly solid team. They went down in the standings a bit when Dylan Brooks like broke his arm and Booker went out with injury, but they were like surprising people with like being like a roughly top five seed for some time. And also, I just feel like Portland is just really young right now. All their best players are like as Jay mentioned, like Shaden Sharp, Denny Avdia, uh, Scoot Henderson, Donovan Clingan. They have a couple older guys, like some vets, like Drew Holiday, obviously two-time champion, and Jeremy Grant. But I just don't think it's really enough to. It's honestly like some teams just need like they need that experience. They need a couple losses in the playoffs to get going. So I'll take the more older team here with the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with both of you. I'm gonna go with the Phoenix Suns as well. I think Devin Booker and Colin Gillespie have been doing very well this season. I think that Along with Dylan Brooks, they have the experience that they need to beat the Portland Trail Blazers. And I think the Portland Trail Blazers have a good number of vets, but majority of their team consists of young players. And like Nitish said, they need a couple of losses before they can actually progress through the playoffs in the first place. So yeah, like you guys said, I'm going to go with the Phoenix Suns as well. All right, so we'll be discussing our next Eastern matchup for the play-in, and this involves the 8 seed Orlando Magic going to Philadelphia to play the 7 seed Sixers. And between these two, I will be choosing the Philadelphia 76ers. I think that even though Embiid is not playing with his appendectomy, which was news recently, I think Maxime, Paul George, and VJ Edgecombe will be enough to win the game against the Orlando Magic that have been struggling recently. We just saw it was Sunday night where the Orlando Magic, with fully their starters trying to win, lost to the Boston Celtics, who was playing honestly their third team squad. And I think that Paulo Banchero has truly regressed. And we all thought that Desmond Bane might be the player that would push them over the edge, but I don't think that he was enough this season. And I think because of that, the Sixers will win this game.
Yeah, I'm gonna same as you, Hockey. I'm gonna take the Sixers to win this game too. I don't think anyone's expecting this game to be like some offensive fireworks types game. Both these teams are bottom half of the league in terms of the overall season offensive rating, so we're expecting more of like a slugfest, like rock fight type game. Should be a low scoring matchup. Obviously, like you mentioned, Embiid's gonna be out with the surgery, and who knows if the Sixers are to advance, how many games is gonna be able to put in terms of a playoff series. But you're going to have to put a lot more on the shoulders of Tyrese Maxey to carry a little bit more in terms of Paul George. You're going to see some more of that like scoring that we saw in some of his previous days and in some of his other stops, like at OKC and the Clippers and things like that. Maxey this season is averaging 28, 4, and 6. So he's put together a really solid season. And we've obviously seen him had clutch moments in the playoffs against other teams, like the series against the Knicks. He played really well too 2 years ago, putting on a strong performance there. That was sort of his like breakout series, breakout star moment for him, you could say. So I'm gonna take the Sixers as well. I just think like the Magic offense as a whole is just too bogged down, like too much, like not enough of the ball going in the basket. It's just like not enough going on from their side of it. So I'm gonna take the Sixers in this playing game.
Yeah, just like you guys, I'm also gonna take the Sixers. I feel like it's kind of weird because both these teams, like around the All-Star break or earlier, were like no, they were above the plan, but they both kind of regressed as the year went on, and now they're in the 7-8 matchup here. So I'm just gonna take Philly. I feel like, as you guys mentioned, like Tyrese Maxey's been balling out, borderline, all NBA second, third guy, and then Paul George, it's like he kind of defeated the wash allegations. He's back playing really well. VJ Edgecombe, like, I mean, if it weren't for Cooper Flag, Nipple having insane rookie years, like he'd be right up there with those guys for rookies. Whereas like for Orlando, it's kind of a shame because they found a way to like regress from last year. They had something going to seem like, and then I mean, traded 4 first round picks or something like that for Desmond Bain. Thought it'd be a good addition. Didn't really seem to work out. Obviously, they had the injury to Wagner for like a while. That was unfortunate, but I don't know. PB no J just like playing inconsistently. I think I'm not really a fan of what the Magic have really done recently. Too inconsistent for me to want them. So I'm gonna take the Sixers so far, like you guys.
All right, so the last playing game we have, this is the Western Conference 9-10 playing games. So loser eliminated, and the winner plays the loser of the 7-8 game. So we have the Golden State Warriors taking on the Los Angeles Clippers in this game. And I'm going to be taking the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously, a disastrous start to the season. Even before the season starts, obviously with the aspiration scandal with Kawhi Leonard and a lot of issues there. And then even the season starts, issues with Chris Paul and his tenure with the team and things like that, and what was supposed to be a retirement type of tour season for him. Didn't work out like that. Disastrous 6-21 start going into December, like late December. And then Ty Lue like comes out in the media. He says we want to have a 35-20 end of the season. Obviously, no one thinks that's possible, and they do almost that. They're roughly around like 35 wins. I think they might have even eclipsed that since their 6-21 start. And so overall, as a season, if you look at it in total, it's a very like mid-average season from the Clippers. I would say, just based on what their expectations were going into the season. Most people expecting them to be a top 6 seed, but from where they started, I would say it's a good way to just make up some of the ground they've had so far in the season. These two teams did play 4 times during the season. The Warriors were 1-3 with them, or 1-3 against them, and their only win was in October. So this is when the Clippers were like really down in that really bad losing streak. And then this was news from Steve Kerr, that head coach Steve Kerr, that's Steph Curry, Al Horford, and Kristaps Porzingis are all going to be under a minutes restriction in this game. So as much as we're looking at this game, and a lot of the media is looking at this game as saying, okay, this is a do or die type game, loser goes home. Steve Kerr is still putting these players, some of his older players, and Steph obviously coming off an injury, under a minutes restriction. If the games go to overtime or something like that, who knows like how much of those minutes those guys are going to be able to play, how much they would have played during the game. So just too much uncertainty to a Warrior season that's been bogged down by a lot of injuries, things like that. So I'm going to take the Los Angeles Clippers to advance to the 8-9 playing game.
Yeah, honestly, I agree with all of your points there. I think the Clippers started off very bad, and even though they did have a deep playoff run aspirations, and then, when they traded away James Harden for Darius Garland, a lot of people did think the Clippers were gonna, they were gonna tank. They didn't really care about winning, but Kawhi started playing at an all NBA level and was able to win so many games. And like you said, they went close to a 35 to 20 level. So that's why I'll be choosing the Clippers over the Warriors. And again, I thought that Steve Kerr would be playing Steph and Porzingis to the most minutes they can, but I guess they want to preserve their health. And I don't know if it's just maybe a smokescreen or if the minutes restriction is true or not, but just going off the news that we've been seeing, if they truly are on a minutes restriction where they can't play more than 30 minutes max, then I'm gonna go with Kawhi and Darius Garland over the Warriors.
Yeah, once again, I mean, we've agreed for like all the play-in games, but I feel like they truly are not really as close as we've seen in the past. So I'm just gonna go and take the Clippers as well. I mean, Kawhi Leonard's been playing pretty much his best basketball since his 2019 season. Obviously, it's a bit of like an individual success. The team was, as you guys said, like started off horribly, turned things around, traded James Harden, uh, fresh start with some new guys on the team, and they did turn it around. Credit to them. And then it's like the Warriors had almost the opposite season where, they had Jimmy Butler healthy. They were playing like playoff level basketball. And then he tore his ACL. They acquired Porzingis, but he's barely played since the trade deadline. And I think I read something like the Warriors have won like 8 games in their last like 30 games. So pretty much it's like opposite trends of momentum right now. Clippers are playing pretty well relatively to other teams, whereas the Warriors are just like as bad as it gets. So obviously, like Steph Curry's that guy, as we know, but on minutes restriction, with like pods on his team. I don't really know how I feel about the Warriors. I'm probably gonna see some like pods clips on Brick Center, but yeah, I think I'm just gonna take the Clippers here, and that'll wrap up our play-in predictions. All right, so we're gonna now preview the. So we did our play-in predictions. Now we're gonna get the actual playoffs. So starting in the East, and we're just gonna work our way down. The 1-8 matchup, all of us had the Hornets beating the Magic in the 8-9 playoff game, play-in game. So the first round series, we'll go over the 1 seed Pistons taking on the 8 seed Charlotte Hornets. And I'm going to take the Pistons in 6 games here. I feel like normally 1-8 series, they usually go in like 4 or 5 games. I'm going to give the Hornets a bit of credit just because they've had some pretty impressive wins this year. They've taken down the Celtics, the Knicks. They've had close games with the Pistons when they have matched up prior times. So that being said, though, I feel like the Pistons, fortunately, Cade Cunningham was able to return, and it wasn't like he returned like last second, just like with 1 or 2 games to go. He still returned with about like a week or two left in the series, left in the season. So I feel like he got decent reps, and he was on a minutes restriction, but I feel like he should be like good for playoffs. Maybe still getting back into the flow of things, but I'm gonna take the Pistons in 6 here, just taking the 1 seed, but giving the Hornets the respect that they earned for being a hot team. What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said. I'm gonna go with the Pistons over the Hornets 6. And like you said, 1-8 matchups are usually lopsided, in which you see the 1 seed usually sweeping the 8 seed, but the Hornets have been on a hot streak recently, and I know that the Pistons have actually swept the Hornets this season, so it may seem like it's a lopsided matchup, but I think the Hornets, you gotta give credit to them. They've been impressive for the second half of the season, and with Cade coming back, pairing him up with Jalen Duren, I think it will be a good matchup, and but it might be too much for the Hornets, so I'll go with Pistons in 6 as well.
I'm gonna same as you guys. I'm taking the Pistons. I'm gonna take them in one less game. I'm gonna take them in five. Not necessarily out of disrespect to the Hornets, more just respect to the Pistons of what they put up this season. Like you mentioned, Cade Cunningham coming back from his collapsed lung injury, so he had enough time to ramp up. Obviously, with a week or so of actual games, he's gonna have this full week to prepare and get some more conditioning in. And obviously, gonna get a lot of fives work with his own team in before the series starts on Sunday in Detroit. But it's mostly just I think the styles. Obviously, the saying "styles make fights." We see that in a lot of like playoff series. I think the sort of style that the Pistons bring with their like really physical front line, even their guards and stuff like that, led by Asar Thompson and even Cade Cunningham on the defensive end, can be very physical and things like that. They can present a lot of issues for LaMelo Ball as a ball handler, Con Knippel, Brandon Miller, those two running like side actions or backup roles or anything like that. And a player that the Charlotte Hornets have, and Musa Diabate is their center, who on most teams and against most other teams would be a strong physical force and be able to go against most opposing centers. You don't see a lot of centers as physically strong and built like Jalen Duren is, so you're gonna have an issue with that. So just like the depth that the Hornets or the Pistons can provide in their front court, that can present an issue for the Hornets. I'm guessing they'll probably be able to take one game in their home stadium. They do have a good home crowd and things like that in Charlotte. So I'll take the series to be about 3-1 after 4 games, and then I'm going to have Detroit winning on their home floor in game five. So I'm going to take the Pistons in five.
Okay, so with our next Eastern Conference playoff matchup, we'll be discussing the fourth seed Cleveland Cavaliers playing the fifth seed Toronto Raptors. And with this, I'll be taking the Cavs to beat the Raptors in five. And it is interesting because the Raptors actually swept the Cavs this season. They actually are 3-0 against the Cavs this year. But that was now with the trade with Darius Garland for James Harden, I do think that he does, even though he's been a playoff choker recently in previous years, I think that he does provide the experience that the Cavs do not really have, and I think it will be enough for them to beat the Raptors. And I think that having a duo with Donovan Mitchell and James Harden uh, cannot be contained by the Raptors. I think the Raptors don't have that many defensive guards that can cover both of them at the same time, even though Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett are good defensive forwards. I just don't think they'll be enough to guard Donovan Mitchell and James Harden. So I'll be taking them over the Raptors in five.
Yeah, same as you, Aki. I'm going to be taking the Cavs over the Raptors in 5 games. I always tell myself coming into the playoffs every year, I'm not taking a James Harden-led team to win any single playoff series. I will break that just for this one series, mostly because the Raptors, as good of a story they've been this season, sort of working their way out of the rebuild and tank phase to sort of like winning some games now. Toronto started out 14-7 throughout the months of October and November. From December all the way until now, they're 22. They're a roughly 500 team, and they're 22-30 over the entire season against teams above 500. I hate to break it to Toronto fans. You have to play teams that are above 500 in the playoffs. The Cavs are one of them. I unfortunately don't think they're going to be getting the win here. Like I said, with the Hornets, I'll give them one win just based on a strong home crowd and things like that. Maybe they'll play good if Drake is in attendance. So we'll see. Maybe they get one win there. I don't think that the Cavs have a semifinal winning or conference final ceiling or anything like that. I guess we'll discuss that in the next round when we talk about that. But I just think that the Cavs overall on offense is just too high powered. I could see a duo of Donovan Mitchell and James Harden or Evan Mobley just beating out a duo of Brandon Ingram or Scotty Barnes in the playoffs, and the supporting pieces around those two just being a lot better. So I'm going to take the Cavs over the Raptors in five.
Oh yeah, just like you guys, I'm gonna take the Cavs, although I'll take them in six. I'll give the Raptors one more game here. Kind of like you guys mentioned, Aki, like you said, the Cavs, they're 0-3 against the Raptors this year. Although all those wins came like really early in the year. And then kind of like what Jay was saying about like against good competition, like kind of to go further, I saw a stat that the Raptors are 5-22 against like the top 10 teams in the NBA, which is the top six in the West and the four in the East. So I mean, it's the playoffs, you're playing a better team. I don't really trust the Raptors. I feel like their best players, aside from Brandon Ingram, are pretty young, like Emmanuel Quickly, Scotty Barnes. So I feel like a little inexperienced of a team. I am gonna take them in six. I mean, I'll have them winning 2 games just because I feel like the Cavs, they've been a bit inconsistent this year. I mean, that happens when you have a James Harden like player on your team. You have the highs and lows, but I think Donovan Mitchell, he's always, he's had questions of he hasn't made it past the second round, but he still is a playoff riser to me. So I feel like he can get it done in the first round. And, Harden, as Jay was saying, hasn't always had the best playoff history. He has made the playoffs in all of the seasons of his career, hasn't really done much with that. But I think they'll get out the first round. Seems like a pretty like must win year for the Cavs. They've had that same core of like, Mitchell, Mobley, Jared Allen. They got rid of Darius Hunter. Sorry, DeAndre Hunter and Darius Garland. Combined two names there. They did make some changes, but it's almost like a must win or must make conference finals type of year. So I feel like they'll be motivated to at least make it past the first round here.
All right, so next in the Eastern Conference, we have the 3-6 series. We have the New York Knicks taking on the Atlanta Hawks. So this series, I'm going to be taking the New York Knicks to advance in 6 games. So I do think the Knicks, their path to a potential Eastern Conference championship is a little bit harder, having to have to play the Hawks instead of the Raptors. Raptors was a team they matched up with very well. They were able to beat them a lot during the regular season. So I still think the Knicks will be able to beat the Hawks. It just might take a couple more games than I would have expected if it was the Raptors because the Hawks do have a lot of defenders that they can typically throw at the Jalen Brunson types. They have the strong, the lanky type of defenders with a lot of like wingspan and things like that to be able to disrupt his ball handling, things like that, and get over some of the screens that they try and run with their Brunson cat screen or roll actions. They have a lot of different defenders. Like we have Dyson Daniels, obviously, Nikhil Alexander Walker, even Jalen Johnson, the guys that's sort of one of their like focal points on offense. He's obviously still a really strong defender, and he can play some of those spots on defense against Brunson. Um, they did play most recently on April 6th, so this just a little over a week ago from the time of our recording. And the Hawks just barely lost that game, right? Obviously, that was a game where CJ McCollum half court shot almost tied it up and sent it to overtime. But the Knicks were able to get that win at the end. But the thing that I took away most from that game is watching the fourth quarter of that game was watching Brunson isolate and work in isolation against the Hawks defenders and things like that. Brunson went 7 of 11 from the floor in the fourth quarter alone. So that's 7 big buckets in the fourth quarter. He's able to score. And the Knicks, they were mostly able to keep it close for the majority of the game, but they were able to just slightly pull away at the end and get that lead at the very end. Obviously, in terms of the defensive end, the Knicks do present some serious issues for a team that's for the Hawks team, which is led by CJ McCollum on offense. Obviously, CJ McCollum, a good player in this league for a long time. He's put up buckets for many years. He's not exactly the type of person you want to be relying on, type of player you want to be relying on as your first option for playoff hoops and things like that, in my opinion. So having players like OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, specifically, I think Josh Hart and Mikal Bridges, especially those are more the guard centric type defenders. They're going to be able to throw at CJ McCollum, and then you have a stronger player like an OG Anunoby that's able to match up with the Jalen Johnson, sort of isolate those two or neutralize those types of issues that the Hawks present to them. Outside of that, you have a lot of spot up shooters and things like that. But I'm not really too worried about what else you see from the Hawks from the offensive side. The Hawks were 1-2 against the Knicks this season, but their only win was during January when the Knicks were on a really bad stretch. That was the times when they were getting blown out and things like that, culminating with a really bad loss against the Mavericks on MLK Day. But that was during a really bad streak. The other 2 times the Knicks were able to beat them. So I think that bodes well for them overall. So I'm going to take the Knicks to beat the Hawks in 6 games.
Yeah, like adding on to what you said, I'm also gonna take the Knicks. I'll just take them in five, honestly. I feel like Atlanta's a pretty young team, and I'm not a huge fan of young teams in the playoffs, just in general. Like, especially this will be their, I think, like with this core, their first ever playoff appearance. So I'm not really not doubting the Hawks. They were obviously one of the hottest teams to end the year. I think they were like 19-5 since the All-Star break. But at the same, it's like I hate picking against the hot teams, but at the same time, the Knicks, this is like a must-win year for them. Obviously, next year you're gonna have the Pacers returning to contention. You're gonna have the Celtics with Tatum healthy for the whole year, hopefully. Obviously, Giannis, whether he's on the Bucks or anywhere else, wherever he's going to be, that's going to be a contending team. So it feels like the Knicks are in must-win mode because they've had the same core for a couple of years now, and there are questions. Should they blow it up? Should they, make other moves? So I'm just going to take the Knicks here. Really like Jalen Brunson. He's like an absolute master on offense. And then you have Cat dominating the paint, being a stretch five, obviously. And obviously just like good other players who like Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, a lot of like good physical rebounders, defenders as well. And then on the other hand, for the Hawks, I feel like they don't have that offensive firepower that can get past the Knicks, like keep up with the Knicks' offensive pace. I feel like obviously like Nikhil Alexander Walker, like Shea's cousin, he's playing well, but at the same time, like how much can you rely on him to get your team to win? Jalen Johnson, a great player too, average a near triple double, but in the playoffs, I don't think he's really going to be able to do much to get this team to win. When you have guys like Dyson Daniels, who, if I'm not mistaken, had like the worst 3-point shooting season in like the 21st century or something like that. Not really a lot going on in offense for the Hawks. I'm just gonna take the Knicks here.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I'm gonna agree with Jay as I will take the Knicks beating the Hawks in six. I think out of all the Eastern Conference playoff series, I think that this is probably the only series that could go to seven because they're both lacking in different areas. You have the Knicks that are not, one of the best defensive teams in the league, and the Hawks are not one of the best offensive teams in the league. And I think the Hawks have been doing a very good job this season, and they've definitely improved from last year. But even though they have a lot of young players and they have people with playoff experience like CJ McCollum and Nikhil Alexander Walker, I still think that the Hawks don't have that go-to guy that can get buckets whenever they need to, like the Knicks with Cat or mostly Jalen Brunson, who's one of the best clutch players in the league. And so I don't think that the Hawks offensive power will be enough to overcome the Knicks lackluster defense, and that's why I'll be taking the Knicks in six as well.
And then to round out the first round in the Eastern Conference, we're going to have the 2 seed Boston Celtics against the 7 seed Philadelphia 76ers, who we had winning the 7-8 play-in game. So I'm going to take Boston in five. I know this is like a really, historically, especially in the last like 20, 30 years, a really nice matchup in the Northeast, nice rivalry we have. But I'm just going to take Boston. They've been on an absolute tear since, especially since Tatum returned. But even without Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown was having them at the 2 seed. I'm also just going to take the team with more depth here. Especially in like the last 2 weeks, we've seen the emergence of guys on the bench like Baylor Shireman, for example, having like multiple 20-point scoring nights recently. Luca Garza had like his own Luca magic moment with his game winner last night. I just really like the Celtics on offense, and I mean, they shoot a lot of threes, but they also make a lot of threes, and they're just going to shoot their way to a win here in five. I do like the Sixers on offense. They have a really explosive, high-powered offense, but again, with questions surrounding Joel Embiid's health, obviously Paul George has had his injury history. How much can Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe really do for this team? We did see on opening night, the Sixers got the upset and beat the Celtics, but or the opening week for the NBA. But I don't really think the Sixers have the firepower to keep up with Boston right now, especially from like a depth point of view as well too. Like the Celtics are probably like 10 or 11 guys deep who could pretty much be significant role players starters on any team in the league. Whereas the Sixers, like once you get past their like sixth guy, like it really there are a lot of questions surrounding can they get rotational minutes in. So I'm gonna take Boston in five. I'd love for this to be a nice longer series because there's a lot of tension between these two teams, but I just think Boston's too good to mess with right now.
Yeah, I'll also be taking the Celtics, but I think that the Celtics will sweep the 76ers. And I know it's hard to predict sweeps in the playoffs, but I just think that the Celtics have a lot more talent than the Sixers. We don't even know if Joel Embiid will be playing. And just to reiterate what you said, the Sixers' depth after their starting five is not that good. And just looking at the season matchups, the Sixers and the Celtics have split the four games and they're 2-2, but that's without Tatum playing in any of those four games. And so once you already have the Celtics that's the second best team in the East, and that's already split the season series, and you add Tatum to that, I just don't think that the Sixers have anyone that can cover Tatum and Brown at the same time. And that's why I'll take the Celtics over the Sixers in four.
So I'm going to take the Celtics as well. I'm going to give the Sixers the most respect out of anyone. I guess so I'm going to take the Celtics in 6 games. I'm going to give the Sixers two. I'm going to guess it's probably going to be a 3-1 series after game four. So I think the Sixers will probably take one of their home games, and then I think they might be able to stave off elimination and get that one win in the road in game five. But I think eventually the Celtics are going to end in 6 games. This is mostly out of due to respect to Tyrese Maxey. Honestly, I'm going to read off his stats from that one playoff series against the Knicks in 24, where there was a hobbled Embiid, right? And he was going against, that was the first year of the Nova Knicks and that whole thing. So Tyrese Maxey averaged almost 30 points, 29.8 points per game, 6.8 assists, and 5.2 rebounds in that series. And he shot 47% from the field overall, so almost 50% from the field, and then shooting 40% from three. So this is mostly just me giving 2 games to the Sixers out of respect to Tyrese Maxey. And the guy's becoming an up-and-coming star in this league, right? He's showcasing that potential superstar talent. So that's something that they have. Obviously, the Sixers now in their sort of timeline, especially with how this season has sort of gone for Embiid. He's played well, but he's still being bitten by that injury bug. You really have to make your decisions mostly based on this backcourt timeline. So you want to make your decisions based on Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe. So in this series, I'm really just looking to see what can I get from these two. Like you said, Aki, they split the season series, but those weren't even with Tatum playing, and some of those were really close with just a Jalen Brown-led team, or even a Jalen Brown-led team that was missing some of their starters and things like that. How are the Sixers going to be able to handle some of the size problems that the Celtics present? You can even play some lineups with Tatum at the five, and you're not going to be hurt by a worry about defense or anything like that, because without Embiid, you're going to have to be starting players like Andre Drummond or a Dembona at center and things like that. How are those minutes going to look for the Sixers is really all dependent on Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, and even what you can see from a potential Paul George throwback game or something like that. So I'm going to take the Celtics. I'll give some respect to the Sixers, so I'll take the Celtics in 6 games.
Okay, so we'll be discussing the first matchup of the Eastern Conference semifinals, and I think all of us have chose Detroit to win and Cleveland to win in the first round. And so with the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Pistons, I'll be going with the Pistons beating the Cavs, and I think that this matchup will go to seven. So I will have the Pistons being the Cavs in seven. And I think this is a very intriguing matchup because you have the Cavs who have Harden and Mitchell, and the Pistons, even though they are relatively young, I think last year was the playoff experience that they needed to push them over the edge and go to the next round to the conference finals. And I think the Pistons have a variety of good perimeter defenders, such as Asar Thompson and Kate Cunningham that could help stop Mitchell and James Harden and contain them. And I think you have Jalen Duren, who is a great defender that can help clamp the paint against Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. So I think this would be a good battle. I think they both have great defenses, especially Evan Mobley, who was Defensive Player of the Year last year. And even though it might be a low scoring game, I think both have enough offensive creation that it'll be going back and forth. And I think that the Pistons will prevail in the end because I think just going based off the season, even though the Cavs have more experience, the Pistons have been playing better this season, and that's why I'll take them over the Cavs in seven.
Similar to you, Aki, I'm going to take the Pistons over the Cavs. I'm going to take them in one less game. I'm going to give them 6 games. So, like we mentioned previously, Tish mentioned specifically in our Cavs Raptors preview, Donovan Mitchell is a guy that has been proven to be a playoff riser, right? Whether or not his teams have been able to go over the hump, make the conference finals and things like that. Obviously, it's a team game. Wins overall are a team construct, but Donovan Mitchell has more than done his part in a lot of these games. He's played really well. So I'm mostly giving these 2 games to the Cavaliers as a sign of respect for him and what he's been able to do for the playoffs. I don't really think he's been saddled with a roster that is exactly full of a lot of playoff risers, guys. We've seen that Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, they've had a lot of problems in the playoffs when things start to get more physical and they aren't able to use their leverage, their size, and their height as well. And they're sort of they aren't able to utilize how the refs blow their whistle a little bit differently in the playoffs. And then James Harden, obviously, we've seen in the playoffs, like we've had over a decade long of his track record not being, he's not a playoff riser and he's a playoff dropper. He's not going to perform well in the playoffs. And Donovan Mitchell is not going to be able to rely on him. Whether or not what you thought of Darius Garland or not in the playoffs, obviously he's more of a size issue and things like that, and just things he can't control on the court and being a little bit of a defensive liability. Harden's less of that, but he still doesn't always give that full effort on the defensive end. You can sometimes see him take plays off and things like that. So I'm going to give the 2 games out of respect to Donovan Mitchell and what he can do, but I'm going to take the Pistons in 6 games. I think their front court is just too strong. Obviously, like I mentioned before, Jalen Duren, and even being backed up by a guy like Isaiah Stewart, obviously a really strong and physically dominating player as well. You have good guards or guard slash forward play with the Asar Thompson and Tobias Harris and things like that. And even you might be worried about, okay, is Cade Cunningham really going to be able to be back to his full potential and his full like MVP caliber level play that he was showcasing earlier into the middle of the season? He has this first 5 to 6 games, what will roughly be against the Charlotte Hornets and things like that, to be able to get back into that game shape, but get back into the conditioning, things like that. And even we discovered over the last like couple weeks when Cade was out, you saw a lot of Dennis Jenkins minutes taking over at the point guard position, and he's playing pretty well there. He was able to get a lot of good reps then too, being able to spread out to his different shooters like Kevin Huerter, Duncan Robinson, things like that. So I like what I saw from the Pistons in terms of that. So I'm going to take the Pistons in 6 games and advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, I'm also gonna take the Pistons in six here. I feel like it's like an interesting matchup between two of the smaller markets in the NBA, Cleveland, Detroit matching up. And they've had some animosity in their matchups this year. They split both of them 2-2. But I think one of those was with Cade Cunningham injured, but I'm still gonna give respect to the Cavs for getting a win there. I think honestly, as much as I mean, I'm a Donovan Mitchell fan, as much as I love how much he rises in the playoffs, I just don't think this is really a roster that's equipped to make a run to the conference finals. I mean, James Harden, he's had his playoff woes in the past, and even that front court, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, not really offensive threats, really good defenders, but when you're going against Jalen Duren and other good front court guys like Beef Sue, they kind of get neutralized on offense. So it's not really a concern for opposing teams there. And then on the other hand, the Pistons, obviously there are questions whether or not Cade will be 100% if he is or isn't. But even if they aren't, the Pistons are like 13-5 without Cade this year. So we've seen the emergence of guys like Dennis Jenkins, Tobias Harris playing better. Sar Thompson turned into like a defensive nightmare, winning Eastern Conference player, defensive player of the month recently. So I think the Pistons, they have enough to, even if Cade isn't good to go for like 1 or 2 games, still have enough of a deep roster and obviously coached by like arguably the coach of the year and JB Bickerstaff. I think they have enough to get it done here in 6. I probably think honestly the Cavs might get up early in this series just because Cade might not be 100% fully accustomed to playoff basketball with his injury. But I think Detroit will take care of business once they get organized. So Pistons in 6 here.
All right, so for our last Eastern Conference semifinals prediction, we have the New York Knicks matching up with the Boston Celtics. And this was the series in the Eastern Conference that I struggled most with in picking. I honestly went back and forth between these teams. Full disclaimer, we also did not tell each other our picks before, so this is all just us like learning about it firsthand and things like that. So I'm going to take the Boston Celtics, but it's the first game that we've predicted so far that I'm going to take the Boston Celtics to win in a 7-game series that I've picked in a 7-game series for. So this is mostly just out of taking into context what happened last season between these two teams, last season in the playoffs, what happened between these two teams, and what happened in the regular season between these two teams. So obviously we saw last season in the playoffs, the Knicks were not able to get over the hump of beating the Boston Celtics in the regular season. The Boston Celtics dominated them every single time they played, even leading up to they had a matchup in the week before last season playoffs started, just similar to how they matched up this week before the playoffs started, and they weren't able to beat them. The Knicks still weren't able to beat them, even with home court advantage in that game. Tatum hit a dagger at the end, was able to win that game for them. And then going into the playoffs of last season, a lot of people expected more of the same. And then that was the completely opposite of what happened. New York goes up in the first 2 games, 2-0 in those first 2 games. Obviously, a lot of critical Tatum mistakes down the end, which caused their losses. A lot of bad three-point shooting from the Celtics, which didn't help their case. And then they're up 2-0 going into game 3, right? And as much as the Celtics were still able to win that game 3, you see Tatum go down with the Achilles injury in game 4. Regardless of whether he goes down with the injury or not, they're still losing that game. They were down a couple points or more than a couple points with not much time left in the game. They were going to lose that game regardless, and more than likely they were going to lose the series overall. So fast forward to this year, you see the Celtics, obviously a different team this year with no Jason Tatum for the majority of the year. They play a couple times earlier in the season, obviously with no Jason Tatum. And you see finally we have a game this past Thursday where they were supposed to match up. It was expected to be a game where they'd both be fully healthy, but we see no Jaylen Brown. The Celtics benched a couple of their other starters and things like that. So, and you're expecting, okay, if the New York Knicks are really that serious of a competitor, or really that serious of a team, you would expect them to blow the Celtics out. But it's still a really close game, right? You require 2 Josh Hart clutch threes in the last minute or so just to get the win for the New York Knicks. So if you're the Celtics, you almost walk away from that game saying, okay, we lost, but we didn't have the guy who's been our MVP candidate first option this entire season. How worried are we really about this thing? So I'm sort of looking at it as maybe we're going to have a reversal of what happened this season. We saw the Knicks a little bit better than the Celtics most of this season, just for the times they matched up and things like that, even the most recent matchup. But I'm expecting those tables to turn when they match up in the playoffs this year. I'm going to take the Celtics. They do have more playoff experience overall, which obviously doesn't really matter because neither of these teams are young in general. But you do have some players in the Knicks that haven't had that many playoff minutes, haven't accrued as many playoff minutes as some of the starters and even the bench players on the Boston Celtics have had. I'm going to take the Celtics to win it in 7. I expect them to get a close win in Game 7 on their home floor. Right, I'm not expecting any of the games to be blowouts or anything like that, like we saw in that Game 3 of last year's series, or even the Game 6 of last year's series, where the Knicks were able to clinch the win. But I do respect Jalen Brunson. He's been a masterful playoff artist so far, and he's an absolute killer in the clutch. So he's definitely going to be able to help the Knicks win a couple games in the clutch here and there. But I expect Tatum to be back to as close as he can get to his full form for this season overall. He's probably going to be reaching that by around the semifinals time. Jaylen Brown, I'm expecting him to play really well. All the role players for the Celtics, I'm expecting them to keep up in their roles, and especially if they just win their home games, I think they'll win the series. So a long-winded answer. Like I said, this is the series that I was the most conflicted on, but I'm going to take the Celtics in 7 games.
Yeah, kind of agreeing with you there. I'm gonna take Celtics in 7 as well. To me, this is probably the most entertaining matchup in the Eastern Conference playoffs. It's, 2 teams with bad blood going at it. Who doesn't love to see that? I'm gonna take the Celtics in 7, giving a lot of respect to the Knicks for they took the season series 3-1. Yes, of course, no Jason Tatum. And then when he did return, as Jay mentioned, there's no Jaylen Brown. So maybe not the most representative matchups, but I still think that the Knicks have a pretty solid roster to compete with the Celtics. And still, although Jason Tatum has returned, he's playing well. He's had a lot of like efficiency concerns where obviously, coming off a torn Achilles, like you can't call out the guy for that. But might come back to bite them in a couple of the games. Obviously, we saw and whenever the year they won the ring against the Mavs, that playoff run, Tatum was like a turnover machine. He had a lot, I think he had like 100 plus turnovers in the whole playoffs, something like that. So I think Tatum's still getting back to like the groove of things. He's not really going to get in proper reps in that Sixers series. I think they'll handle the Sixers relatively easy. So in their first real matchup in the playoffs, he might take some time to get going. And so I'll take the Knicks. I'll have the Celtics winning in seven. And like going back to that matchup last week on April 9th, where we saw Celtics Knicks, the Knicks did end up winning, obviously no Jaylen Brown, but like Jay said, like they needed two clutch time threes from Josh Hart. And like anytime Josh Hart's your leading scorer, he had like 26 on the night. Like how often is that ever going to happen again? For being honest, Jalen Brunson is that guy on offense. And I think an underrated aspect of this matchup is Neemias Queta, who's been a really underrated player this year for the Celtics, had some like most improved talks for winning the MIP. He's kind of like the nightmare center for Cat in a way because he's really physical big that dominates. Like he lives in the paint. He doesn't go anywhere else. He just sits in the paint like all day on defense. Obviously, like going to the perimeter whenever Cat's out there to help, he's stretching the floor. But Keita is like a really physical big, and we saw it in their last matchup where Cat, I think he only attempted like 12 shots and he put up like 15, 16 points, something like that. So I think Cat might be neutralized here, leaving it just up to Jalen Brunson. And I unfortunately don't think Jalen Brunson could take down Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum on his own. So in this rivalry, I'm going to go Celtics in seven, but it's going to be some really good basketball.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, but I will be taking the Celtics in six instead of seven. And I think that this will probably be the most fun playoff matchup in the Eastern Conference, especially because you have a rematch of last year's matchup where it was a close battle between both teams in majority of the games last season. And I think that, even though the Celtics are 1-3 against the Knicks, just to reiterate what you guys said, Tatum and Brown haven't been playing together in all of those games. And I think this is an interesting matchup because if you just look at their rosters and who have played this season, I feel like the Knicks are more, they have a larger depth chart. They have an eight-man rotation or a nine-man rotation they can play in the playoffs, which you really haven't seen in previous years, especially with their previous coach in Thibodeau, who would usually just play their starters to the max minutes. While even though the Knicks have a nine-man rotation and the Celtics, if you just look at their depth charts and who they played, they have a six-man rotation. I think that the Celtics do have enough to, especially with Tatum and Brown, to do more than what Brunson can. And I think Nitish brought up an interesting point with Neemias Queta. I think he's a very good defensive center who has improved this season, who can guard Cat. And you also have Vucevic, who the Celtics got at the trade deadline, that could space the floor and allow Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to ISO and cook and go into the paint against the Knicks defenders. And even though Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby are very good perimeter defenders, I think that Jaylen Brown has improved much more than the Bridges and Anunoby has improved. Jaylen Brown's playing like an MVP level. Tatum, he even though if he's still rusty with the efficiency concerns, he'll still have that first playoff series where he can still get back in control. And I think Tatum and Brown can go back to the duo they've been in previous years and do more than Brunson and Cat and be able to win. So I'll have the Celtics in six.
All right, so our last Eastern Conference prediction that we have is our Eastern Conference Finals, and all three of us have the Detroit Pistons, the one seed, taking on the two seed, the Boston Celtics. Sort of a chalky series in terms of the one and two seeds playing. But in this series, I'm going to be taking the Boston Celtics. I'm going to take the two seed to upset the one seed. I'm going to take the Celtics in six games. So for the Pistons end, this would be their first Eastern Conference semifinals since 2008, right? So this is around the time of the new gen of the Bad Boy Pistons, almost that team led by Chauncey Billups, Rasheed Wallace, Rip Hamilton, all those guys, making six Eastern Conference Finals, right? I think it was from 2002 or 2003 all the way up until 2008. They were making six consecutive conference finals. So it'd be their first return to the conference finals since then. And we're seeing sort of a similar style on how they play, a lot of physical defense and things like that, and a lot of strong players overall from the guard backcourt all the way to the forwards and the front court and things like that. But I do think they're just coming up against a team that has too much firepower on offense, too much offensive creation, that while they do have a really strong defense and they may be able to mitigate some of that offensive firepower, the Celtics also have a really strong defensive foundation and defensive identity that I feel like can disrupt what the what the Pistons tend to do on offense. The Pistons do have a really heliocentric type of offense in the way they run everything through Cade Cunningham, which can work in the regular season, especially when you're playing against teams off little to no scouting on them on a night-to-night basis. But when you're playing against a team in a 6 to 7 game series, it can tend to be harder for a team that plays that type of style to win. You've seen a lot of guys in the past when they play that type of style. It's easier for teams to sort of key in on that and focus on what they like to do in terms of their tendencies and frequencies and things like that, and break it down on defense a lot easier. So I'm going to take the Celtics in 6 games. I'm going to give, obviously, this will be a close fought series. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 7 games, but I could still see the Celtics winning it out even on the Pistons' home floor in a game 7. But I will take the Celtics in 6 games and ruin the first Eastern Conference Finals return for the Celtics or Pistons since 2008.
So I'll be taking the Celtics as well, but I honestly think it's going to be a lot more lopsided in the Celtics' favor, and I think that they'll be beating the Pistons in 5. I think when you just look at everything, I think the Celtics have a lot more going for them, in which, the Pistons are very good defensively, and they have one of the best perimeter defenders in the league with Asar Thompson, but I just don't think that he himself can contain Brown or Tatum fully, and they don't really have any other defenders that can guard Tatum or Brown. If you look at players like, Cade is their other good perimeter defender, but he's going to be taking a lot of the offense, and so he can't handle most of that defensive workload. You have Ron Holland, who's also pretty good at defense, but he's also very young. I don't think he's equipped for the challenge to guard Tatum or Brown. And then their defensive centers in Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, they're very good in the paint, but they're not going to be very effective against Celtic centers that are not the majority of their offense. You have Tatum and Brown, which are forwards that are majority of the offense, and they are one of the best mid-range shooters in the league. So they don't even have to go against Duren or Stewart if they don't want to. And so I think that the Celtics have I don't think the Pistons have enough defense that can stop the firepower of Tatum and Brown. And like you said, Jay, the Pistons do depend on Cade for a lot of their offense, especially with Cade and Durant in that pick and roll. And I think that the Celtics have enough on defense that can guard them. You have Kata who can cover Durant, especially in the paint because Durant's not the best shooter. And you have Derek White, you have Jalen Brown. They can always rotate on Cade on defense, and so I think the Celtics will be a little too much for the Pistons. So I have them in 5 over the Pistons. But I applaud the Pistons for going to the Eastern Conference Finals and especially going to the first seed after tanking for previous seasons.
I'm also going to take the Celtics in 6. I think it's interesting because in the 4 games they played this year, the Pistons won 3 of them, and all those games were decided by like 7 or fewer points. So all the matchups were pretty close. But I think at this point, to me, really, when you're this deep in the playoffs, to me, that's where like experience prevails. Where we've seen Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown like make 2 finals before. They've been in the Eastern, they like live in the Eastern Conference Finals pretty much. Whereas like this Pistons team, as excellent as they've been this year, where they've exceeded so many expectations, getting the 1 seed, I just don't think they've been this far in the playoffs. Like I don't think they can all of a sudden rise to that occasion. Kind of like Aki was saying, I don't think they really have also the depth to keep up with the Celtics. Like they have so many good guards slash like point forwards, forwards, whatever. Like we haven't even mentioned like Peyton Pritchard, arguably like the best contract in the league, where he's giving you like a good 17, 18 points a night. Baylor Shireman off to the bench, Derek White, Jalen Brown, Jason Tatum. Like that whole guard forward rotation is unbelievable. And I just don't think the Pistons can really contain it. I'm gonna give them 6 because they still do like I believe they still have the number. I don't know if this is true without Cade, but up until Cade's injury, they had the number 1 ranked defense in the league in terms of like opponents' points per games. So I will give the Pistons some credit defensively, and also having home court advantage can maybe help them get a game or 2 extra compared to where they would have been if it was the other way around. But this is a pretty overall chalky Eastern Conference. I think all of us had the East, like the higher seed, winning all the matchups. But for the conference finals, I'll take the lower 2 seed in 6.
So for our first matchup of the Western Conference, we all had the Clippers coming out of the play-in, and so we have the OKC Thunder 1 seed playing the Clippers with the 8 seed. And I think not much has to be said about here. I think the Thunder will beat the Clippers in the first round in 4. I think just talking briefly, the Thunder have swept the Clippers this season, and I know that Kawhi has been playing very well this season, and the Clippers definitely have been amazing second half of the year. But I just don't think that Kawhi and Darius Garland will be enough against the defensive guards that the Thunder have and the offensive power that Shea and Chet. I just don't think the Clippers can contain them. So just to keep it brief, I think the Thunder will beat the Clippers in four.
Yeah, and if you guys couldn't tell, Aki's an OKC fan, so he's having a nice time right now. But yeah, I'm also gonna take the Thunder in four. I mean, this is probably the most lopsided matchup in the entire first round of the entire NBA playoffs. But like you said, the Thunder were 3-0 against the Clippers. Kawhi has been playing well, but there's no winning basketball going on the Clippers right now. The Thunder, they're gonna be led by like likely the back-to-back MVP. They're out to go back-to-back in rings. Um, Keep it like short and simple. Thunder and four.
I'm also going to be taking the Thunder. I will give them Thunder in 5 games. So I'm going to give the Clippers 1 game here. It's mostly about just the way that Kawhi Leonard specifically has played this entire season. A guy that's going to be most certainly going to be on an All NBA team, potentially vying for a first All NBA team spot. So he's played really well this season. I could see the Clippers potentially stealing one of the home games. They do have somewhat of a good defensive starting, and so in their starting lineup, they do have some good defensive pieces there. Right, obviously Chris Dunn, a guy who that's specifically like a defensive guard forward type defender, and then Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, we know about his defensive talent. The rest of the team, it's not like they have a lot of like too many defensive strong suits there. Obviously, Darius Garland being a bit of a defensive liability in the front end, and then Brooke Lopez not being how he was back in his prime a couple years back in terms of the defense. So I could see the Clippers maybe getting one of the home games there, but I do think it's going to be the Thunder and a pretty easy win. So I'm going to take Thunder in 5.
Okay, so the next matchup in the Western Conference, we got the 4 seed Los Angeles Lakers taking on the 5 seed Houston Rockets. And you know what? Call it glaze, call it crazy. Lakers is 6. And let me explain. So all I'll say is, look, storyline is no Luka Doncic, no Austin Reeves, 41-year-old LeBron James. Can he do it again? Can he turn back the clock to 2018? Can he lead a roster full of bums, except for Bronny James, to the next round of the playoffs? Can he can he do the impossible against, the Rockets?
Probably not, but keep going.
You know, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. But, just making my points here, I think obviously, I think I will say the reason I didn't just blindly take the Lakers because of LeBron, partial factor. But for example, if they played like the Wolves, I probably would have the Timberwolves winning. So I'm just going to take the Lakers here for a couple of reasons. One, Houston has been one of the most inconsistent teams this year in the entire league. In their matchups against the Lakers, they're I believe 1-2 against LA. Obviously, they had Luka in those games. I know it's a different story, but we saw in like one of those games, for example, and actually in all their matchups, Kevin Durant has had problems with like the Lakers defense, where we saw like JJ Redick creating double teams to contain Kevin Durant. As a result, we saw him have like an insane amount of turnovers in those games. So I think with the biggest offensive threat potentially being, obviously you can never shut down KD. The most you can do is like limit KD to like a lower scoring night. He's still going to get his 15 plus no matter what. But I think if you can slow down Kevin Durant, then that really opens up a lot of holes on the Rockets offense where we saw they don't have a number two option on offense. We've seen Alperen Sengun obviously be one of the most inconsistent players in the league where he has up and down nights. He's like, he was called baby Jokic coming into this year, but now it's like he's like fetus Jokic, if he's even that. Like he's not there at all. Amen Thompson, defensive like nightmare like his twin brother, but on offense, like he can't shoot a shot to save his life. He's really had problems stretching the floor, which is weird for a shooting guard. So I think ultimately the Rockets, they should win this. They're favored, but I'm just gonna take the Lakers because I feel like although they're down offensively, they have the defense. They'll have Marcus Smart being back, Jake LaRavia, a good perimeter defender, to at least help reduce KD's output and then lead to potential where, LeBron James, this is last week, was awarded Player of the Week, averaging a humble 25, 10, and 6. Back to backs at age 41. What can't the man do? LeBron, turn back the clock for all of us out there. But what do you guys think? I think
You
I
know,
know.
he just got Player of the week that we had the most injuries that people didn't play.
I mean, listen, an award's award.
All right, so as much as I would love to see LeBron turning back the clock one more time, I'm going to be taking the Houston Rockets in 6 games. I'm also just glad to see a LeBron KD series for the last time. Obviously, the first game one between them is already the Saturday night primetime game, so it's pretty evident there's still a draw, the two of them playing, whether or not their teams are in position to win a championship or anything like that, which I don't think either of them are. but I do think the Rockets are going to have the better chance in this series and end up with the win. So we did see these two teams play. We saw them play two almost back-to-back games. They had one day in between them in mid-March, right? And we saw that this is when the Rockets were starting to like get out of their like sort of like tailspin and like downwards in the standings. But this is when the Lakers were really starting to shoot up, and the Lakers won both of those games. It was a Monday game and the Wednesday game. But the part of that game that we don't see now is that they had both Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves slated, and they did play in those games. So the difference between those series and that small series they had then and this playoff series they're about to see between the two of them, there is no Luka Doncic for definitely the beginning of the series. As of today, we received news that he's scheduled to come back from his treatment that he's had on the hamstring in Europe. He's going to be back with the team on Friday. We'll see how soon he can get back to actually playing in the series. But I wouldn't expect him earlier than any game 3 or game 4 or something like that. So I wouldn't expect to see him until you get back to the games in Houston. Austin Reeves, on the other hand, I don't think he's going to be coming back at all for this first round. It looks like he's going to be out for a while with a back or oblique injury that I believe he had. So we're not going to see either of the two of them for a while. Like you said, it's going to have to be a lot of LeBron James as the first option on the team. As a 41-year-old, can we really rely on that? As much as we do all want to see that, we want to see him sort of turn that clock. Is this something we can really rely on? Obviously, the Rockets, on the other hand, they're relying a lot on KD to bring the ball up and things like that. But against a team that's not that, against a team that's more devoid of those types of perimeter defenders, those type of defenders that can just really like hound KD on the ball, similar to what we sort of saw in the 2022 playoff series when he was on the Nets against the Celtics. We had a team that with a lot of like perimeter defenders, perimeter dogs on defense that could sort of make it hard for him to bring the ball up because they don't have their true ball handler in Fred VanVleet. Obviously, you can't really give the ball to Amen Thompson, and obviously Ime Udoka doesn't really trust Reed Shepard, otherwise he'd be playing him a lot more minutes. So all in all, I'm going to take the Houston Rockets in 6 games. I think you're just going to see too much of KD, too much of Şengün, things like that, too much on defense and things like that for the Lakers to handle. I would like to see a Game 7 potentially, maybe a LeBron Game 7 for the memories or something like that. But I'm going to take the Rockets in 6 games.
Yeah, well, I'll be taking the Rockets as well. I think that both of you are very bold and giving the Lakers a lot of credit, but I'm going to be taking the Rockets in five. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rockets win in four. I just think that I just think that the Lakers have a lot going against them. I mean, it goes without saying, even though that the Lakers are 3-1, and especially in the last two matchups recently, you don't have Luka and Reeves, and I think that the Lakers don't have a single defender that can guard Kevin Durant one-on-one. The only way they can stop him is by double teaming him. And I think that even though if they do double team him, you do have Sengun and Amen Thompson. And DeAndre Ayton is not the best defender in the league. He's not going to be able to guard Sengun. And so I think Sengun will cause problems against the Lakers. And Amen Thompson, Tish, even though you said that he can't make a shot to save his life, he just scored 41 the other day, and his efficiency, especially in the recent weeks, have been really well. He doesn't need a shot to score over 20 points. He can score in the paint. He's very athletic. There's no center on the Lakers that can really stop him in the paint. And I think that sorry, Marcus Smart, you're not 5 years ago. You're not a defensive player of the year anymore. Him coming back will not make a difference at all. He won't stop any guard on the Rockets, especially such as Reed Shepard or Amen Thompson. And I think that this is probably the worst roster surrounding LeBron in his career. So by putting it all on LeBron, I think he will still be able to score. He will be able to get his 25 points, but I think the Rockets have some good perimeter defenders in Jabari Smith and Tari Eason and Jayshawn Tate that you can limit LeBron to a little bit, but when he needs help, it's the worst roster of his career, so he's not going to be able to receive the help that he needs. So, I'm not going to blame LeBron because he's 41 years old, but I think the Lakers, it's the end of the road, and unfortunately, it's not because of him, it's because of unfortunate injuries. So I'll have the Rockets in five.
Bet.
All right, so our next matchup that we're previewing in the Western Conference playoffs in the first round is the 3-seeded Denver Nuggets taking on the 6-seeded Minnesota Timberwolves. So obviously, this matchup we've seen this has been one of the better rivalries in the NBA in the last couple of years, right? Obviously, taking shape with the very beginning, these two teams matching up in the 2023 playoffs. The Nuggets is the first seed, and the Timberwolves as the 8th seed. And we saw the Wolves were only able to get one game off of them, but that was a very young Anthony Edwards. A lot of the roster wasn't the same as the way it is now, and you started to see how some of the playoff like formations that take shape throughout the next couple years. Then we see a really good series with them, a 7 game series in 2024. And obviously, Anthony Edwards and the Wolves getting the win in game seven. A huge comeback, an almost 20-point comeback in game seven to get the win. A really weird series if you think about it, because the Nuggets lose the first 2 games on their home floor. The Wolves have a 2-0 lead going back home into Minnesota. Then they lose both those 2 games. So you're seeing looking at a 2-2 series coming back to Denver. Denver gets the win in game five. And then game six, Minnesota absolutely blows out Denver on almost 50-point win for them. Comes down to a game seven in Denver. And then Anthony Edwards and the whole Minnesota Timberwolves crew is able to get the 20-point comeback and secure the win for them. Obviously, go on to the Western Conference Finals that year. So if you're just looking at the series overall and sort of how the series, how this rivalry has sort of been constructed with them. So the guy who is currently the president of basketball operations with some ownership stake in the Minnesota Timberwolves, Tim Connolly, right? He is a guy that he'd been with the Nuggets since June of 2013. So almost a 10 year long, decade long tenure with the Nuggets as their president of basketball operations. He leaves in he leaves towards the end of the playoffs in 2022, right? He leaves Denver and then he joins the Timberwolves as their new president of basketball operations. His first move then, first of all, as a president of basketball ops for the Denver Nuggets, he was able to construct the majority of that team that wins the championship in 2023. So obviously he wasn't there to see the fruits of the labor in terms of that team winning the championship, but he was the one that was responsible for the team when they were there drafting players like Nicole Jokic, getting players like Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., things like that, Bruce Brown, all very key pieces that were helpful and necessary in them in order to them to win the championship in 2023. So fast forward a little bit, he leaves for the president of basketball operations job in Minnesota, and then a couple months later, that's when they exercised the trade for Rudy Gobert. Obviously, in that first year, it's a little bit clunky to fit with both him and Cat on the same team, but they end up making it work out in the next year, right? That's when they're able to beat the Nuggets in that 7 game series in 2024. And then we see even last year in the regular season last year, obviously the two teams didn't meet in the playoffs last year, but in the regular season last year, they had a 4-0 record against them, right? The Wolves were able to beat the Nuggets all 4 times they matched up during the regular season last year. This season, it seemed like it's almost flipped on its head a little bit. A little bit of some of the changes in the rosters potentially. The Nuggets going into this season looking like they reloaded their roster a little bit, getting some of their old players back, like Bruce Brown and things like that, getting a player back that they want now on their roster. It sort of flipped a little bit. So the Nuggets were 3-1 against the Wolves this year, but the first 3 games all occurred from October until December, which the last of those 3 games taking place on Christmas Day, an overtime battle where the Nuggets were barely able to escape. The last game between them was most recently on March 1st, and this was in Denver, and the Wolves were able to get the win. So I'm sort of looking at it as like, okay, if you have this type of series where you have two teams that have a lot of bad blood together, but the Wolves are full of a team of a bunch of playoff risers and things like that. You have a superstar player in Anthony Edwards, who obviously has had a little bit of injury concern the last couple of weeks, but it looks like he's going to be able to play this series. You have a guy like Jaden McDaniels, it looks like he's going to play this series too. The Nuggets it's obviously not facing too much of the injury bug. It looks like Aaron Gordon's going to be all right, so it looks like they're both going to be healthy from that end. So if you're looking at the series just from that, you're probably going to lean more towards taking the more dominant player in Nikola Jokic. But I'm going to take the Minnesota Timberwolves to beat them in 7 games. I'm going to call in for the upset right now. I'm taking the Wolves in 7 games. Taking this mostly because of my respect and admiration for Anthony Edwards as a player. He's a really good player, really fun player to watch. One of my most favorite players in the game to watch right now, especially a young player. And just out of respect for what the Wolves are doing and how the Wolves are built, I think they're built really well to beat this Nuggets team. Just the way they're constructed, even without Karl Anthony Towns, how they beat them in the playoffs that one year, substituting Julius Randle into that spot. They still do have a lot of good guard defenders. Obviously, acquiring Ai Sumo now, in addition to their backcourt rotation, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, and things like that, so they can still pressure the ball a lot. Jamal Murray's had a lot of problems bringing the ball up against his team and doing his sort of thing on offense. And you still have a guy in Rudy Gobert that's presented some problems for Jokic in the past. Obviously, Jokic is a really talented player. He's still going to get his, but you have a backup big in Naz Reid that's still playing really good minutes. Terrence Shannon Jr. is a guy that's come along really well in the last couple of games. He's put us in good points too. Can you rely on him for some backup scoring and key minutes here and there in the second and third quarters? So all in all, to say that's a lot of preamble to just say that I'm going to be taking the Wolves in 7 games to beat the Nuggets.
Yeah, I think, like you said, this will be one of the most, if not the most fun matchups in the playoffs. But on the other hand, I will be taking the Nuggets to beat the Wolves in six. And I think that, like you said, 2 years ago, they had a very interesting, very good playoff series in which that series went to seven. But I just think that when you just look at the rosters compared to last season, I think the Nuggets did make more changes than the Wolves. And they are built to beat the Wolves, and I think that just first to discuss their playoff the regular season series, the Timberwolves are 1-3 against the Nuggets. And even though the most recent matchup in March where you have the Wolves beating the Nuggets, I feel like you don't have, even though both teams you could say are fully healthy, I just think that Peyton Watson is going to be the difference maker in this series, and that the Denver Nuggets did not have Watson in that game, and he's uh, definitely made a huge improvement compared to last season, becoming a much greater defender, a much better three-point shooter, and even when Jamal Murray and Jokic were not playing games, he was a great offensive creator as well. And so I think even though the Wolves won the most recent matchup between them, I just think that the Nuggets didn't have Watson, so you can't really make a prediction based off that single matchup. And I think that when you're comparing the Nuggets and the Timberwolves, I think that you have Anthony Edwards, who is a superstar. He could arguably be a top five player in the league, but in recent years he has definitely been a playoff choker. And I think that especially when we look at a series against the OKC Thunder, he was very inefficient and he was scoring very few points, less than 20 points per game. And when you say that, when you have him being very inefficient and not scoring much in the playoffs and you ask him for help, Julius Randle is not the number two option you want on a championship team. And I think that the Timberwolves especially made a huge mistake not getting Anthony Edwards help this season, not trying to trade for Kevin Durant. And I think that's where it's going to falter against them. You have very good defenders on the Nuggets, such as Aaron Gordon, that can guard Julius Randle. And then you can also have very good perimeter defenders on the Nuggets, such as Peyton Watson and Christian Brown, and even Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway that can help double team Anthony Edwards if they need to, because it's very hard to cover him one on one. And if you leave Randle open, he does not have the offensive firepower that will be enough to make a difference this season. So all in all, I just think that like we all know, Jamal Murray is a playoff riser, and Rudy Gobert, even though he's a multi defensive player of the year winner, he just won't be able to stop Jokic. So I think that the Nuggets have enough to take down what the Wolves offer. And even though Ant might not be the playoff riser we all thought he was, especially based off last season, I think that the Nuggets will win in six. But it will be a good series.
Yeah, like you, Ocky, I'll take Nuggets in six. I mean, it's like this will probably be the best matchup in the first round in the West, just because it's like kind of like a rivalry in the making between these two teams. We saw them match up in the playoffs, like Jay said, and the Wolves took that one in seven. But I think here, I mean, you guys like pretty much made a lot of the major points. I'll just like add on, but I think this is probably the worst the Wolves have been going into the playoffs in the Anthony Edwards era, where I feel like, Jaden McDaniels has been injured for the last about roughly 2 weeks with like his bone bruise. And then Ant-Man has been like banged up with like the knee injury for a while. He did return. Obviously, he's had some like struggles shooting efficiency wise. I'm not going to hold it too much against him because returning from an injury, you're going to have some bit of a shooting slump. But I don't think the Wolves really have a lot of momentum going to the playoffs. Whereas on the other hand, the Nuggets, they ended the year on like a 12-game winning streak. Jokic is doing Jokic things, finally looking like he's back to his old self after his knee injury earlier in the year. He's looking good. And like Aki was mentioning, Peyton Watson should be returning for this playoff series. He's been out for a really long time now with that hamstring injury. I believe it was hamstring. So I think he's returned to like scrimmage action. So it's not confirmed when he'll be back in the series, but all things are trending towards him being ready for game one. And I think that's critical because the problem with Denver, they've always had a top offense, especially this year with Jamal Murray's rise in the regular season. But the defense has really been the question. They have like a bottom third defense in the entire league. And I think part of that is due to Aaron Gordon being banged up for a lot of the year, and even with him returning, him not playing proper minutes, getting used to rotations again. And then B with Peyton Watson back, you could argue Peyton Watson is the best defender on the Nuggets. And so, like Aki was saying, he was like an MIP candidate where not only did he increase his defense, he was already a good defender, but he became an even better one. But he became a solid offensive player, averaging like I think like roughly 15, 16 points a game, something like that. So I think with Peyton Watson back, that can help. Obviously, you're not going to stop Anthony Edwards, but you can at least reduce his output. So I think Peyton Watson, like one on one, could definitely counter Anthony Edwards. And then I look at it like who on the Wolves is really going to slow down Jokic. Like, yes, Julius Randle, he's last year kind of like got rid of some of his playoff demons, turned it up in the playoffs compared to the past. But Jokic, his impact, he doesn't even like need to just score. He can facilitate an entire offense through him. And Rudy Gobert, he's never been a perimeter defender. He's been like a joke in the perimeter. So if Jokic is facilitating an entire offense out there, Jamal Murray, I don't really see anyone stopping this Nuggets offense. It'll be a good matchup. That's why I have it going 6 games, but I think Can't Man can't get it done. So I'll take Nuggets in six.
Okay, so for the last matchup we'll be discussing in the first round of the Western Conference Finals is the Phoenix Suns. We all chose the Phoenix Suns from the play-in, being the Blazers. So we have the 7 seed Phoenix Suns playing the 2nd seed San Antonio Spurs, and so I think it's very similar to the OKC Clippers series. I think the Spurs are a lot more dominant than the Suns, and so I have the Spurs beating the Suns, but I have them winning in 5. I think the Spurs present a huge defensive problem against the Suns, even though they split the season series and you have Devin Booker and Dylan Brooks coming back. I just think that the Spurs have a lot of great perimeter defenders that can guard Devin Booker, that can guard Dylan Brooks, and you have Wemby in the paint that can guard Mark Williams and will make it very hard for Devin Booker to score in the paint. So just keep it brief. There isn't much to say. I just think the Spurs will pretty easily beat the Suns, and the Spurs will win in 5.
Yeah, same thing as you, Spurs in five. I mean, the Spurs, you could argue they're probably the hottest team in the entire NBA, especially after the All-Star break with Wemby returning and everything. I think that like on paper, matchups wise, it really can't get worse for the Suns, like you were saying, like who's guarding Wemby, and then that insanely deep guard rotation that the Spurs have. I don't think the Suns can match up. Like, yes, Dylan Brooks is like a kind of like a pest on defense. You could say he's a good defender, but outside of him, like no one else. Royce O'Neal is a solid defender as well, but aside from those two guys, like no one is going to stop Steph Castle, De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, Devin Vassell. It just goes on and on. Even like Keldon Johnson, 6 man off the bench. So I'll give the Suns 1 game just because I feel like the Spurs, Wemby's first ever playoff series. Maybe he has some playoff jitters like a lot of young stars do, but ultimately, I think the Spurs will comfortably win in 5 games here.
Yeah, same as you guys. I'm going to take the Spurs in 5 games over the Suns. Similar to you, I think the Suns could get 1 game at home potentially, maybe winning game 3 or game 4 when they get it back in Phoenix. But the center rotation for the Suns, right, it's going to be Mark Williams and Oso Ighodaro taking most of the minutes against Wemby. And I mean, as much as a lot of teams wanted to trade, as much as the Lakers really wanted to trade for Mark Williams last season, his services are he's definitely a good player and things like that. A lot of teams wanted him from Charlotte, but he's just not the type of player you want guarding Wemby. And like we mentioned before, they do have Dylan Brooks, and Devin Booker can be a good guard defender at sometimes, but they do the Spurs backcourt rotation is just really good, really young, a lot of good players. So I just think it's going to be too much for them to handle. So I'm going to take the Spurs in 5 games. All right, so we're each going to do our Western Conference semifinals predictions first, since we have a couple of differences in the first round series. So my first Western Conference semifinals matchup is going to be the OKC Thunder versus the Houston Rockets, and I'm going to take the OKC Thunder in 6 games, actually. A little bit more than I would have expected if you asked me this a couple weeks ago because of the slide the Rockets were in. But the Rockets will come back a little bit better. I think they're going to have a good sort of jump start into the playoffs with the first round against the Lakers, an injured Lakers team. So I think they're going to have a little bit to be able to work up their conditioning, just work up everything, get the game speed and things like that. So, but I just think the Thunder are going to be too good. We saw these teams obviously put together a classic game on opening night, that double overtime thriller. But we haven't seen anything like that to that level with the Rockets being that good and just us believing that they're going to be in that level for the rest of the season. So I think this is going to be the end of the road for the Rockets this season. So I'm going to take the Thunder in 6 games. My next semifinal matchup that I have is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the San Antonio Spurs. This series, probably the second most series that I had the most difficulty deciding between after the Boston Celtics and New York Knicks series that we talked about previously. But eventually, I decided that I'm going to go with one of the youngest teams ever in the playoffs, probably just by ages and everything like that. So I'm going to take the San Antonio Spurs. I'm going to take them in 7 games to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. Giving them 7 games because I don't think this is going to be a series that's going to be a rollover by the Minnesota Timberwolves. We obviously that they have a lot of experience in the playoffs so far in the last couple of years, and playing really deep in the playoffs. Obviously, reaching the conference finals in the last 2 years. But I do think that the Spurs just present too much of a problem for them in terms of defense, with Wemby patrolling the paint and things like that. It's going to be really hard for some of their guards like Ant and Ayo Dosunmu. Even Mike Conley, an older player that still wants to get downhill and drive every now and then. That's going to be a lot of trouble with Wemby patrolling the paint. And like we mentioned before, the Spurs have a really dangerous backcourt rotation. Obviously, Dylan Harper, Steph Castle, De'Aaron Fox, and guys like that. So it just makes it a lot harder for the Wolves to deal with all that. I'm still going to say it's going to be 7 games just based on respect for the playoff experience that they have. But I'm going to take the Spurs in 7 games to reach the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, so for my Western Conference semifinals matchup, I had OKC versus the Rockets, and I was going to say that Thunder will be beating the Rockets in five. I wouldn't be surprised if it went to six as well, especially because the Rockets have been playing pretty well recently, especially in the last few weeks. But I do think the Thunder will win in five. I know that based off just the season series, the OKC Thunder are 2-1 against the Rockets. The one win the Rockets did have was when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams weren't playing, so I wouldn't really include that, especially when the Thunder didn't have their two best players. But I think that when you just look at the matchups, I think that with OKC having Chet back and Hartenstein, who hasn't been playing recently, but he is back, will be more than enough to handle Sengun and guard Sengun. And so basically OKC's main problems would be against Amen Thompson and Kevin Durant. And it goes without saying what OKC Thunder's perimeter defenders are. You have a variety of perimeter defenders like Cason Wallace, who led the league in steals this season, that can guard Amen Thompson. And then you have Chet and Hartenstein that can guard the paint, which is what Amen Thompson really excels at. And then you also have OKC's forward defenders that can guard Kevin Durant like Jalen Williams and Lou Dort. So I just think that similar to some other series, this is a very lopsided matchup. And I think OKC will beat the Rockets pretty easily, and I think it will go to five. And the next semifinals matchup, unlike Jay, I did have the Nuggets being the Timberwolves, so I think that this will be a very good matchup. But I do have the Nuggets being the Spurs in seven. I just think that I think the Spurs are very talented, but similar to the Thunder 2 years ago, it's hard to make a deep run your first year in the playoffs, and this is the Spurs' first year in the playoffs. You can't go all the way without playoff experience. And you can have all the talent in the world, but once the playoffs start, experience matters once the stakes are high. And I think the Nuggets do have the experience that they have that can beat the Spurs. And, I was debating this matchup and I thought that, Wemby will be very hard for Jokic to play against. But if you look at that thriller matchup that happened recently where Jokic was still able to get his, I don't remember, his 30-point triple-double against Wemby. I think that Jokic will still do Jokic things regardless of Wemby guarding him. And I think that Jamal Murray, being a playoff riser, is good enough to score at will against those San Antonio defenders. But I will give the Spurs credit, and I do respect them. But I think the playoff experience of the Nuggets will outrise the Spurs' lack of experience. So I have the Nuggets in seven.
Yeah, so going to my Western Conference semifinals matchup. So I had the OKC Thunder taking on the Lakers, and I think this is where like the road ends with the Lakers. I have OKC in five with the prospect of potentially like Luka Doncic maybe returning for a game. Uh, Not really knowing what could happen there, but if not, it could even be OKC in four. Pretty much, it just comes down to it's really lopsided matchup here. Pains me to say this stuff, but it's just the truth, unfortunately. The average margin of victory for OKC this entire year in the four matchups that they swept the Lakers in was 29 points, which is just a ridiculous margin. So I mean really no chance for the Lakers. It's unfortunate they got the four seed. I think they were hoping for the three seed to maybe avoid OKC in round two, but couldn't avoid it. OKC in five or four moving on. I'll say five. And then going to my other matchup, I had the Spurs and Nuggets like Aki, and I'm going to take the Nuggets in six games here. It was this again, like we saw this matchup this year. This is a really, really nice matchup. Only one of the games was decided by double digits. But ultimately, I'm just going to go with the more experienced team. We've seen Jokic make deeper runs in the playoffs multiple times. Kind of like you were saying, Aki, it's Wemby's first year in the playoffs. Like, how far can he really go? A lot of teams, they often need that one like playoff loss to then come back the next year. We saw it happen with like OKC, for example, when they lost to the Mavs. So teams need a quote unquote humbling experience. I think that the Nuggets were 3-1 against the Spurs this season in the regular season matchups. Both sides have had injuries, so it kind of cancels out. But ultimately, I'm just going to take Jokic. I feel like Wemby's going to do Wemby things, play ridiculously well basketball, but they just have a really young team. Playoff jitters are a real thing that fans don't talk enough about. I'm going to go with the experience here.
All right. So then to lead into our Western Conference Finals predictions for each of us, I'm gonna have the OKC Thunder versus San Antonio Spurs. Obviously, I'm sort of going against the school of thought that you typically need to have a couple like one or two rounds through the playoffs before you sort of take your medicine, so to speak, before you can actually have a playoff run. But I am drinking the Wemby Kool-Aid, so I do have them in the Western Conference Finals. And this is even bucking the trend of just we've seen in the past. A defending champion, hasn't even made the their respective conference finals in the last probably 7 or 8 years, I think. So we haven't seen it since the 2019 Warriors did it. So I'm having the OKC Thunder get all the way to the Western Conference Finals. But I'm going to go for the upset in this. I'm taking the San Antonio Spurs over the OKC Thunder in 6 games. So we saw these two teams match up. It was granted it was a lot earlier in the season, and I'm sure a couple of them, Jalen Williams, may not have been there as he was dealing with his injury at the beginning of the season. But the Spurs were 4-1 against the OKC Thunder this season, right? We saw them beat them in the NBA Cup games, the in-season tournament games. We saw them beat them in the Christmas Day game, and I believe they had a game just a couple days before the Christmas Day game where they even won, and even a game in January they won. They did beat the Thunder were able to beat the Spurs in the very last game where they matched up towards the end of the season. So they were able to get one win there, but I just think the Spurs team matches up really well with how the Thunder play. They have enough guard defenders, especially this young athletic type of guards that they can throw at SGA. They can throw at Jalen Williams. They can throw at those type of players and separate the ball handling from them, get the ball out of their hands and get it into their secondary creators, which the Spurs are more than happy to let guys like Lou Dort, get like guys like Alex Caruso or any case on Wallace or even guys like that. Guys that are still accomplished ball handlers and they're good players and you can still run the offense through them to some level, but you don't want it to be running through that a lot. So that's something that the Spurs are going to be able to rely on. And like we mentioned before, the Spurs are one of the most feared teams to be going inside the paint against because of just the presence himself of Victor Wembanyama. So obviously, this is going to be a matchup of the teams that don't really have too much playoff experience overall. But in terms of OKC, relative to the Spurs, they do have a lot more, especially with winning the championship last year, going on Western Conference semifinals run 2 years ago. But I am going to take the Spurs in 6 games to beat the Thunder and then reach the NBA Finals.
I think that, well, unlike you, I had the Thunder playing the Nuggets, and I just want to make a point that even though OKC did beat the Spurs, in this all the Spurs wins this season, it was without Shea, J-Dub, or Chet all playing, and so when you don't have a trio of those players, you can't really make a good prediction. But I'll go to my own prediction right now. So I did have the OKC versus Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals, and I will take the Thunder in six. Uh, I think that this will be a really good rematch series of the semifinals last year that went to seven. But I think that, just look at the numbers this season, especially the series matchups. OKC is 3-1 against the Nuggets this year, and the one win that the Nuggets did have was without any of OKC starters playing. So OKC essentially swept the Nuggets this season, and I think if you just look at the rosters, I think just going off their 3 wins OKC had versus the Nuggets both fully healthy, you have a plethora of perimeter defenders that can guard Jamal Murray, that can guard Cameron Johnson, Christian Brown, that especially in Casey Wallace and Lou Dort and Jalen Williams, that goes without saying that I think can stop Jamal Murray this season, even though and then you can see from their playoff series last year where Jamal Murray was limited in some of those matchups, especially because of being guarded by those perimeter defenders. And I think that it's very hard to stop Jokic. I mean, Jokic will get his 30-point triple double anytime he wants. But if you look at the matchups this season, even though Jokic was playing amazing, he does not have the help he has from the regular season because of OKC's surrounding defenders. And I think that will make the difference. I think OKC's defense is a lot better than the Nuggets offense. So that's why I have OKC in six.
Yeah, pretty much just like tagging on to what you said. I also have OKC in six over the Nuggets. I think one underrated factor here could be the fact that the OKC, with when I had them facing the Clippers and the Lakers, they could potentially make the conference finals after like only playing 8 games, maybe nine. Whereas for me, I have the Nuggets then playing a 6 game series against the Timberwolves and then a 7 game series against the Spurs. So having nearly double the amount of games going into the conference finals and then being on the road could really be a lot of like mentally and like physically taking a lot of toll on the team. So that being said, though, I think it'll still go 6 games. We obviously saw the classic last year 7 game matchup between these two teams was fantastic basketball. But then going back to this year's matchups, like you were saying, Aki, they were 3-1. The Nuggets they lost 3 games against OKC, and one game they did win was with both teams' backups playing, so that doesn't really count at all. So I think that OKC, and it's funny because like every team, no matter how good they are, they still have some flaw. OKC's flaw was like their 3-point shooting, but the acquisition of Jared McCain at like the trade deadline really helped with that, coming off the bench, shooting roughly like 39% from three off of like 3 or 4 3-point attempts, really helped them. Obviously, we saw like the ascension of like Isaiah Joe, a lot of just good 3 and D guys that OKC seems to like spawn in somehow. But I think I'm gonna take OKC in six. I know I really don't like taking back-to-back like finals appearances for teams just because you don't really see it happen often. But I think OKC is too good. And to me, it's always kind of been like their championship to lose in a way. So, or at least from the West. Like it's been the West runs through OKC, and I think it's gonna stay that way this year where I'll have OKC in the finals.
All right, so we got to the end of all of our bracket predictions, and so we're at the NBA Finals now. So we're going to decide who we think is hosting the Larry O'Brien Trophy at the end of the season. So my playoff or my finals NBA Finals matchup is going to be the San Antonio Spurs versus the Boston Celtics, so the two seed in each conference. And I think both of these teams winning it would be a great story. You see either potentially one of the potential future greats in this league and Victor Wembanyama winning his first trophy, or you see the Celtics winning two trophies in the span of 3 years, and you see Jason Tatum coming back from his Achilles injuries and winning it. Both are great stories. I'm going to take the Boston Celtics to win this championship in 6 games. I think obviously they match up. I think they do match up somewhat well with this team. Obviously, like we mentioned before, it's hard to get in the paint, but it's not a team that mostly focuses on driving into the paint. We do have a team in the Celtics that while they do have Kata and they do feed the ball to the post to him, sometimes it's not a focal point of their offense. Like we mentioned, their game is mostly about spreading out to threes, spreading out to shooters in the corners and the wings for 3 pointers and stuff like that, and working the ball in their ISO work with Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum. So obviously the hope is with this, with my final prediction here is Jason Tatum's going to have a long workup and a ramp up time into this. You're going to see them play a lot of tough series in the Eastern Conference, obviously, but those should help them prepare for a potential final series against the San Antonio Spurs. I think it would be a great accomplishment for the Spurs to even win the finals, just let alone making them like I'm predicting them to, especially in their first playoff run ever. This would be something almost unprecedented that we haven't seen from young teams like this in the past. But I'm going to take the Boston Celtics to beat the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA Finals in 6 games.
So for my prediction, and we all had the Celtics coming out the East, but I did have the OKC Thunder taking on the Boston Celtics, and this is actually to me an underrated good matchup. I feel like, OKC obviously has like an aura to their name where you think they're automatically going to win. And I do have them winning ultimately, OKC in six, but I think Boston is definitely not a team to overlook. You could argue Denver might like OKC Denver could be the real finals matchup, but I think Boston is a really good team. They split their season series this year. Obviously, injuries on both sides make it a bit questionable, but I think ultimately the problem is that Boston, they pretty much are known for living and dying by the three, where they're like top five in 3 pointers attempted, top 10 in 3 point shooting percentage. Obviously, you have guys like Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, Peyton Pritchard. They just love shooting threes. And I mean, it works. They're the two seed, they win a lot of games. But I think OKC has some of the best perimeter defense in the league. You have a lot of guys like, I mean, Shea himself is a good defender, but excluding him, you have like uh, J Dub, you have Lou Dort, Jared McCain off the bench, Aaron Wiggins, the steals leader in Case and Wallace. So a lot of really good perimeter defense that I think could ultimately neutralize Boston's main point of attack through the three. And so then it's like if they get a paint attack going and Boston pretty much has no front court presence to me, like in my opinion. Like Neemias Queta is an effective zero on offense, as much as an underrated player he is, as he is. And then it makes like the fact that you're going against like Chet Holmgren, probably the second best defending big man in the league, like that doesn't make matters any better for Boston. So I think Boston can will themselves to winning 2 games in this series because I mean they took a game off of OKC earlier in this year, but Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, ultimately the star power is enough to will them just to win solely based off of those two. I mean, Jalen Brown, borderline, to me at least, a first team All NBA guy. Jason Tatum, by this point in the finals, should be done with his efficiency will, should be back to the Jason Tatum that we know. But I think that OKC is just, they're too deep of a team and they can do a good job of stopping Boston's main point of attack by neutralizing the three and then taking over and going back to back and winning in 6 games. Yeah.
Yes, similar to Nitish, I also had OKC playing the Celtics, but I will be choosing the Thunder to win in six against the Celtics, which I am excited about. Uh, I think the Thunder, they did split the season series against the Celtics, and even though I am a Thunder fan, I did want to say the Celtics as well. In their most recent matchup, you had both teams relatively healthy, and the Celtics did win. They had a very good second half. I think they outscored the Thunder by 14 in the second half. So just because OKC was doing very well in the first half, but I think that when you look at their rosters and how the team is constructed. Oh, the Celtics were shooting almost, I think, 45 to 50%, had a 3-point rating. And so, like Nitish said, they do live by a three and they will probably die by a three because OKC has the best perimeter defender guard rotation in the league with Cason Wallace and Jalen Williams and Lou Dort and Alex Caruso and who we have barely mentioned yet. And so I think those defenders will be good enough to stop Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. And just to reiterate what Nitish said, I think that the Celtics do not have a very good front court defensive presence. You have Kata, you have Omari Williams, who is pretty non-existent, but I think Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein will be doing good on offense, and I think that they will be doing good enough to overcome that lackluster front court defense that the Celtics have. And I think that just to finally state that I don't think that the Celtics really have anyone on their team that could stop Shea on the Thunder. OKC runs almost a they can if they want to with Mark Daigneault, he could run a 10 to 11 man rotation while the Celtics, if you look at their roster, they're only running a 6-man rotation and their only defender that can stop Shea, if you really can stop Shea, is Derek White. But eventually I think that it gets to a point I think that OKC's offense and their defense will be a lot hard to overcome from the Celtics. So I do have the Thunder winning in six. But kudos to the Celtics, especially in a year where they everyone thought that they would be tanking and competing for a high draft pick. They ended up with the second seed and they have Tatum, so they will make a good run. And I think they'll be very good next year.
Okay, so I think that's our bracket talk there. Summarize, Jay has the Boston Celtics winning, and then Akhilesh and I have the Thunder winning. So let us know how we did. But Aki, hopefully you had some fun. Maybe you'll be back next week. You never know.
It was great to be here. I'm honored to talk about the NBA and always talk about my favorite team in the Thunder, and I'm glad you chose them to win as champions. And Jay, we're gonna have a talk outside after this.
All right, I guess we'll have to see what happens in the playoffs then. So you guys all have our predictions. So let us know in the comments whether you guys agree with some of our picks, whether you disagree with anything. But that's going to be it for this episode. So hopefully next week, the hope is we'll do a little bit more of the draft stuff as the NFL draft is getting closer. And then the playoffs are going to be starting this week. We're going to have the play-in games starting as of tomorrow night as we're recording on Monday night. And then we have game one starting as soon as Saturday. So hopefully if there's a lot of good games in the playoffs, which we're hoping for, as soon as game ones, we could do some potential instant reactions after some of the night games or things like that. And then, yeah, like I said, we'll be back for our main episode about the draft next week. So we'll hope to see you all then.